My name is Griffis, and for my Sherlock Holmes short story project, I chose the story A Scandal in Bohemia. Before I go over the plot line for my story, I just wanted to show you guys a quick map of a plot line. Like in all Sherlock Holmes stories, the exposition is pretty similar. It's pretty much just a person coming in to Sherlock's office and pretty much asking for help for a case. In this story, it is actually the King of Bohemia coming to ask Sherlock for help solving a case, and Irene Adler is the person he is asking Sherlock to help him with. In most Sherlock Holmes stories, the rise in action is the longest part of the story, and this one does not differ from that. So, in this story, the rise in action starts from the point where the king starts telling Sherlock about his story, where he is getting married soon, but he used to be with Irene Adler, like around 5 years ago, I think it was, and how he had a photo together. He was like telling him about how he had letters to him, and Sherlock was telling him it would be forged, signatures could be faked, but then, and a photo, which could also be bought, and then the king told him that him and Irene had a photo together, and Irene was threatening to show who he was getting married to, their families. She was threatening to show them, and that would disrupt the marriage, probably end it, and affect like the entire future of Europe after that point, and which is a very, very big case. And so the rise in action keeps like building up towards the climax as Holmes and Watson, they go over their plan to locate the photo, and it pretty much involves them. Sherlock is gonna get like hurt or something, and he's gonna get into the house. Watson's gonna set off a fire. And they didn't really add too much details after that, and then the story starts right into the climax. As we get into the climax of the story, Holmes and Watson's plan is getting carried out, and Holmes has he fell into the road right by Irene's chariot, and he fell over on purpose, but of course he didn't make it obvious, and he had like red paint in his hand, and he smushed it to his forehead to think like that he had like a cut in his head, and that he would like need a lot of attention. And so Irene was like, "Oh, bring him in, and they brought him back to his house, which was exactly part of Sherlock's plan. She put him in her bedroom, or the sitting room, sorry, and then Watson, he came in and he started the little fire in the bottle, which wasn't a real fire. It was just like a device to make a lot of smoke. And so Watson sounded the alarm, and Irene rushed in to get her most prized possession, which was the photo. She could not lose that. It was very important to her, and which is exactly Holmes's plan. Then he saw her where it was, and he knew his job was finished. He said that he could have taken it right then and there, but that wouldn't have been good. And so he just left, and he met it back up with Watson, and then they went back home. So immediately after the climax of the story is the falling action. And the climax was the big scene where Holmes discovered where the photo is, and he meets back up with Watson. And then they go home and they get a good night's sleep. And then when they wake up in the morning, there's a letter addressed to Holmes from Irene. He reads the letter out loud and says that she returned the photo to the king, and she should have been more suspicious about the whole thing and had been warned against him. This doesn't seem like too big of a deal, but it actually is, because this is, I think, the first time that anyone has outsmarted Holmes. She stopped him before he could take it from her. She delivered to him personally, and I was kind of blown away by that, actually, and so was Holmes. And he was saying again, like, that Irene was the woman to him, and that she was like super smart and everything like that. So after Holmes started reading Irene's letter, he realized that the photo had been returned to the king. the king thanks Holmes and offers him anything he wants. Is a pretty fair reward that he gets a very big reward for it, as he pretty much saved the entire future of Bohemia. Who knows what could have happened if Holmes hadn't stepped in. And instead of taking an emerald ring with like a snake on it, which would have been pretty cool in my opinion, Holmes just wanted the photo instead, and it was no use to the king anymore after he had gotten it out of Irene's hands, because he knew Holmes wouldn't give it to his wife's family, and so he agreed to the plan, and he just gave away up the photo. And after that, Watson kept saying that every time that Holmes sees the painting or ever talks of Irene, he speaks very highly of her, and always refers to her as the woman, as she foiled his plan. I mean, Holmes has like an IQ of 190, and he's probably like the smartest person ever. And Irene, she foiled his plan and just stopped him when he wanted to continue on, and he just wasn't able to finish his plan, but it all worked out at the end. So the 5 short story elements that I chose were character, setting, genre, conflict, and foreshadowing. So for the character, there was like 4 main characters in the story. I just chose Sherlock Holmes because he's probably like the main character in the story. And for the setting, I chose London, since all Sherlock Holmes stories, including this one, are located in London or the area around London. For the genre, it is realistic fiction. I mean, it is fiction, but it could happen. It's not unreasonable that it could happen. Like it would be for complete fiction or maybe like science fiction. Then for conflict, the conflict of the story was that the king was trying to get the photo back from Irene so he could save his marriage. And for foreshadowing, early in the story, Watson's talking about like how smart Irene was and how Holmes really, really, really admired that of her. And then that was direct foreshadowing to later in the story when she outsmarted Holmes. She foiled his plan, but it did end up working out as the king got the photo back. But she stopped Holmes's plan before he finished it, which was very, very impressive. No one has ever done that before. And that, how Watson was saying how smart she was, that was foreshadowing the Irene foiling the plan of Holmes at the end. Okay, so for my forensic conclusions, one of them was that Watson had been getting wet lately. He observed it on like his clothes and stuff. And then the second one was that Watson had been in practice again since Watson is a doctor. Sherlock observed that he had like a indentation in his hat from his stethoscope, like that had been there, and he saw the indentation in his hat from it. And then that Watson has a clumsy and careless servant, as Sherlock observed the scratches on his left shoe, and that it was a bit not cleaned very well. And then Sherlock also deduced that the paper came from Bohemia, the letter that the king sent him about the case, and it was pretty. He just like looked at a bunch of small letters, and he deduced that it was from like Germany, and then he saw like the little initials EG, and he looked in his encyclopedia or resources book, whatever he calls it, and he saw that it came from Bohemia. Then I'm not really sure how he did this one. It's just what Sherlock does. He discovered that the man who wrote the paper prefers wearing a mask than showing his face. Like the king, when he came to Sherlock's office to explain the case, he was wearing a mask, like covering his face, disguising who he was, and he used like a fake name and fake identity. And that's just classic Sherlock. No one knows how he does it. He's just Sherlock. So next up is the character charts for my story. And first up, the main character in the story is Sherlock Holmes. He's a very, very bright, cunning detective. probably the most logical and deductive person of all time. And Sherlock is in every story, like they're called named after him. And he can determine numerous things about you just by how you look, a letter you sent him. In this story, he deduced that the king was wearing, like, he was hiding his identity just through the letter he sent him. He never saw the king. He never saw how he acted. Also determined that the letter had been sent from, or the paper had came from Bohemia, through like little initials or letters on the page that most of us wouldn't even noticed. Then Dr. Watson, he's another character in all of the Sherlock Holmes stories. He's a medical professional who is Sherlock's best friend and partner in solving crime. And Watson's not usually able to deduce the solution of this story. He's often baffled by Sherlock's ability to come to the solution just like the rest of us. And he's always there for Sherlock. He's just a great friend of Sherlock. He goes on everything with them. He hangs out with them a lot. And yeah. Then next is Irene Adler. Irene is a very cunning and pretty woman, and according to Watson, Sherlock often says she's the woman he claims, like how smart she is, and just how great like of a woman she is. And then that, like as we saw earlier in the story, foreshadowed Sherlock getting outsmarted by her, which I had never seen that happen in any of the Sherlock Holmes story before. And that was just unreal. Sherlock, as I stated before, 190 IQ. He's very, very good at what he does, and he was stopped by Irene. And also, the king was going to marry, well, he was in a relationship with Irene, but that later came to a halt, and they were kind of like enemies, kind of. Well, the king was trying to get back something from Irene. And then that leads us in the king. The king is the king of Bohemia. His real name, well, I've just been calling him the king throughout this presentation, because his name is really, really hard to say. It's Wilhelm Gottschalk Sigismund von Ormstein, and he is the king of Bohemia. And in this particular story, he's the one that comes to Sherlock for assistance, and he prefers to mask his identity. Even came to Sherlock with a mask on and a fake name, which Sherlock kind of already knew that he was going to through the letter that Sherlock sent him. And yeah, and he was very important to the case, as if Sherlock was not able to return the photo to him, then that could have changed the entire future of Bohemia, Europe. That could have just changed the future. And that is it for all of the main characters of the story. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it.